And welcome once again to the Grill Report with journalists Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. Wells. Hey Nicole, how's it going?
Pretty good, Charles. How about yourself?
Pretty good. So we have a really interesting topic we would like to talk about tonight. Recently there was the Met Gala for the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. And the Metropolitan Museum of Art was able to get an exhibit of some of the very elaborate Catholic vestments and art, from some of it loaned from the Vatican. So what they did is they had the gala, or the Met Gala, and what they did is they made the theme art and imagination and the Catholic imagination. And what happened was celebrities came, several of them dressed in outfits that had Catholic connections. Now, some are calling this blasphemous. You had Rihanna show up as a pope in full papal vestment, but except the skirt was way too short. You also had a woman dressed as a sexy cardinal, a Victoria's Secret model, and I'm sure if you look online, you'll get a chance to see some of the different outfits and things. Now, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York, he was happy about it. He said that this brought a lot of people who may have been practicing Catholics, kind of brought them back into the fold, and that this event was like a big public square to make more people aware of Catholicism. So he didn't have a problem or think it was blasphemous, while others thought it was horrible. Laura Ingraham on Fox called it 50 Shades of Catholicism. Now, interestingly, both Nicole and I are practicing Catholics. But we sort of disagree on this. I think that's fair to say, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think in certain aspects. I mean, we don't disagree entirely, but on certain points we do disagree, yes.
So we're going to have a conversation on that. And as always, we ask that you let us know if you like it, don't like it. Give us your feedback when you listen to this. So let's get into this. This was held this week in New York City, and various and sundry celebrities and movers and shakers showed up to attend. And so what were your views on this, Nicole?
I think that while the intention was probably good, in promoting, the Catholic imagination, I think that the execution was a bit lacking. I think that it's I don't even know what the word is that I'm looking for. I think that it's just not okay for people to show up in sexualized versions of religious regalia. You had a sexualized version of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which that should never be. Like you had said, you had the sexy cardinal that was the Victoria's Secret model. You had Rihanna show up as a pope, which women are not ever allowed to be popes. So I just think that it's denigrating to the faith in general, and I think that you would never have had something like this were it any other religion. There would be an outcry. If it were Judaism or Islam or any other faith, there would be an outcry over how could you do this? That's such a terrible thing. What's wrong with you, society? But somehow it's okay to bash the Catholics and the Christians. That's okay somehow. I mean, just recently there was that flap about, the teenager who went to prom in the Chinese cultural traditional dress, and got a lot of flack for it about, cultural appropriation, whatever that is, in America. But, so she got a lot of flap about that, for wearing a dress from a different culture. This is wearing garb that is a part of someone's spiritual experience, someone's spirituality. And I don't think that's okay. I think that it was mocking, and I think that, it was offensive, and I find it even more offensive that a cardinal thinks that that's okay, to be showing up, in all kinds of in sexualized images that don't belong. It's inappropriate.
Well, you see, this is where kind of the problem where the rubber meets the road. And you mentioned the young girl who was not of Oriental descent or ethnicity, and she wore kind of a traditional Chinese dress and was castigated for this cultural appropriation. But it seemed like the only people who were upset about that were here in America. The Chinese, several news organizations went to China and interviewed people, and they all thought it was really cool that somebody wanted to wear a Chinese dress. And where we live in central New Jersey, we have a very high Indian or Asian population here, and in the town that we live in, and they have an Indian festival called the Navratri Garba. And one of the things that the group that puts it on is very happy about is when they have non-Indians come and join this celebration, which is these people dance around in a circle for hours in traditional costume. And they're very pleased when folks not from that ethnic background come in, don those costumes, and join with them in this dance. It makes them happy. So I guess the thing is when you're talking about cultural appropriation and things like that, and then you have to get into the whole Halloween thing, which this year was the first year it kind of became a thing. Was that, for instance, if you were not Mexican, you couldn't. If you put on a Halloween costume with a sombrero and a poncho, something that, at my age, when I was a kid, a lot of folks did, that somehow you were culturally appropriating and you were being mean to Mexicans. So the point is, where's the line for that? Should there be one?
I think that there is a difference, though, between cultural homages and taking someone's religion, someone's spiritual beliefs, and denigrating them in the way that I feel that this Met Gala did. I think there's a difference because, America is the land of, America as a whole, if you want to sit there and talk about cultural appropriation, that's the entire country. I hate to break it to everyone, but the entire country has been culturally appropriating since its inception. This is the place where everyone comes, all cultures, all walks of life, wash up on these shores, and everyone assimilates and blends together while retaining pieces of their culture. That's what makes America great. The only American culture is the blending, of multiple cultures. So I think it's a little bit different than spirituality.
But the problem I have with that is that how can it be different? Now, if you have someone who's an atheist or an agnostic,
mm-hmm. And we have plenty of those.
To them, that don't have a spiritual, emotional connection to the garb of monks or priests or nuns, to them, putting on the costume is no different than dressing up as a zombie or dressing up as a vampire or dressing up as a cartoon character.
No, I understand that completely.
But if we're not supposed to be upset or triggered, or if we're not supposed to be taking offense at things like people wearing a Mexican sombrero and a poncho, then if someone who doesn't have a connection wants to dress up as a pope or a rabbi or an high man, why should we, if we think it's foolish to be offended by that, then we should grant the people who do want to do that with the same latitude. We can't say that it's okay in this case where it's an ethnicity or a stereotype or a I don't know if how do you would characterize a fictional character or entity. But how can it be okay for those, but not for this?
Because when you're putting on a Mexican sombrero, you're not changing the essential nature of the sombrero. There is no changing the essential character of the item that you're putting on. Okay? What was done at the Met Gala is entirely different. You are changing the essence of what is being represented. There are no female popes. There are no female cardinals.
Yet.
Okay? Well, and according to church teaching, there should not be. However, there are no female popes. There are no female cardinals. There are no cardinals' outfits or popes' outfits as revealing as those two that were worn, the ones that I saw. And the image, of the Blessed Virgin Mary, that should never be a sexualized image, ever. That goes against the entire fabric of church teaching about who Mary was.
But by the same token, let me ask you this. Did you support Charlie Hebdo?
Did I support Charlie Hebdo?
Yes.
The magazine?
Yes. Did you support them when they were drawing caricatures of Muhammad? Did you think that they had the right to do that?
Well, I was not aware that they were drawing caricatures of Muhammad.
That's what the whole thing was about. They were drawing caricatures.
I knew they were drawing caricatures. I just could not remember what the caricatures were about.
They're about Muhammad, and that's what caused the folks to go in there and start shooting the place up.
Okay, so the difference, though, is... I'll answer your question, but hang on one second. Because I'm not dodging your question. I just want to differentiate for a moment here. So, on a First Amendment premise, yes, I do support Charlie Hebdo drawing caricatures of Muhammad. Okay?
Even though people in that religion say that is forbidden, blasphemous, and a disrespect of Islam.
Yes.
Much in the same way you're saying what happened at the Met Gala is blasphemous, disrespectful of the Catholic Church.
The difference, and this is what I'm getting to, the difference here is that, yes, I think it was offensive and I think it was blasphemous. However, I am not about to go start shooting up people and ending their lives for something that I think is offensive, okay? I'm not about to sit here and say it should be banned, it should not be allowed. People should not be allowed to express themselves however they see fit. Just because I think it's offensive doesn't mean it shouldn't be, is the point. I may not agree with what they have to say, okay? But that doesn't mean that on the other hand, I'm banning them from saying it or I'm inflicting some sort of punitive action on them because of it.
Okay, so you were upset.
No, I wasn't upset.
Let's say you were offended. Well, you were offended by what happened at the Met Gala.
Well, not to the degree that most people in America are offended on a daily basis, but to a certain degree, yes.
Well, enough so that we're talking about it.
Well, yeah, I think it's an interesting topic of conversation, seeing as how we're two Catholics who tend not to agree on various points in this discussion. So yes, I think it's highly informative, but continue.
But the point is that if you found this offensive, then how can you sit there and when someone else finds something else offensive, maybe nothing to do with religion? Mm-hmm. Going back to the sombrero, and by the way, I happen to think, my own personal opinion is, I don't think a ton of the people in Mexico care whether or not we wander around on Halloween dressed as sombreros and ponchos.
Well, I think it's just another example of people making something out of nothing, but yes.
I've known Mexican people in my life, and none of them have ever brought that up on the panel to discuss with me that they felt bad about it, felt good about it, or
indifferent about it.
Or indifferent about it. Much like with the Irish on St. Patrick's Day. There's a saying that's old as the hills here in America that everyone's Irish on St. Patrick's Day.
Which is interesting.
Except me, I'm a Scotsman, and I will not give up my sovereignty.
Well, anyway, not going to go there, but no, it's interesting because in America, St. Patrick's Day is actually a bigger deal than in Ireland. In Ireland, it's kind of a minor holiday in terms of celebrations. In America, it's huge. It's very interesting how that is. But absolutely, I have heard that ever since I knew what St. Patrick's Day was. Thankfully, I am Irish. I was blessed with that, unlike my Scotsman friend here.
Well, we all can't be perfect there. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely, that's exactly what I thought. It's so good of you to point it out. But anyhow, but yes, I mean, I am Irish, so it didn't really matter. But if I weren't Irish, all of American culture would be, basically propelling me to be Irish for a day and applauding me for wearing green and, putting on a fake Irish accent and drinking green beer. And
it's not just, for the record, it's not just St. Patrick's Day. Columbus Day.
Oh, well, there's a big outcry these days about Columbus Day.
Well,
Columbus was not perfect. Just like, the rest of anyone who ever did anything to found America. I'm sure that you can find something in their background where they were not perfect, but despite that fact, Columbus Day is a flap now.
We've had days in America, and I'll say, I'm going back years into the 60s and 70s and 80s. We have had days where different ethnic groups have been celebrated for whatever reason. And cultural appropriation on those days has actually been encouraged. But now, in today's climate, everything is cultural appropriation. Everything is offensive, and you shouldn't do it. And, unless you are that ethnic group or that stereotype, or I guess if you're that cartoon character.
Well, that's where we're headed next, America.
I mean, forget dressing up as Bugs Bunny or Roger Rabbit or...
No, there's problems with all of those characters. You better just leave it alone right now. We could do a whole nother show on that.
Or Garfield.
Oh, man.
We don't want to appropriate, But what are we coming to where all this is bad? And I think the thing of it is that, you see a lot of these things and you hear a lot of these stories. For instance, the girl with the prom dress, and you see this and you say, that's ridiculous. No one should be criticizing her for that choice. It's a celebration. It should, the fact that she wanted to go outside of her ethnicity, and I mean, girls don't, and please, feminists, don't jump down my throat for this.
You're asking a lot.
I know. But generally, in my experience of 55 years here on the planet, girls tend to want to look beautiful when they go to the prom. When you're getting yourself ready to go to your prom, you're not trying to look like a dirtbag.
I mean, nobody shows up generally in a garbage bag with a trash can,
That may be coming.
I mean, maybe Oscar the Grouch's prom date, but most people are not showing up.
You don't want to culturally appropriate Sesame Street. Now you're crossing a line.
We can count how many. But anyway, so back to the original point. No, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right, that nobody intends to look grungy, and that it was not, making that particular choice for a dress was not meant to
mock or
was not meant to mock. I think though that this Met Gala, I think that was very different because, when she wore that dress, for the Chinese dress to prom, she wasn't altering the dress. She wasn't making it, less or more, than it was. So I think the fabric, the essence of the actual incident is different, because the background of these items, these vestments, the image of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the cardinals, these are supposed to be, non-sexualized imagery, and the fact that, they've been so hypersexualized in these images, that they've been changed and altered, and it's altered the very fabric of what the actual image or idea is, and I think that that's the difference here.
So your point is that it goes more almost like a crime in a certain way, that it goes toward intent.
Yeah.
That by physically changing these, we'll call them costume designs, mm-hmm. that you are trying to make a point. I mean, if you take an outfit, you're not just dressing up as a Virgin Mary, as some religious person might actually do during Halloween.
Well,
but you're shortening the skirt and making it very what's the word for it?
Sexualized.
Well, it's sexualized. I was thinking for another word, but I can't find it right now. But more worldly.
Secular.
More secular, but more worldly than.
Yeah.
Than
it should be.
Than some people believe it should be.
Well,
again, you're going to have agnostics and atheists out there saying, she was a woman, who cares?
I understand that, but yes, she was a woman, you can take that perspective. She was a woman, and who cares? But the essence of the teaching about her, okay, is that she bore a child without having relations with an earthly man, okay? She is the least sexualized woman that you'll ever find in terms of historical teaching, okay? Mm-hmm. Especially among today. So I think that that's the difference, is that, if somebody puts on, a nun's habit for Halloween, that's fine. To me, it's...
But what if they put
I wasn't done. But, if you're wearing just a regular nun's habit for Halloween, that's fine. But I don't agree with shortening, showing extra skin, changing the essence of the message of that thing. Like, it's, like, that to me, that's very different if you were to put on, an air quotes sexy nun, costume, as opposed to just, a regular, Mexican with a sombrero. I mean, that to me is different, because one, you're just dressing up as someone who's from a different culture, okay? The other, you're vastly changing, the meaning of that costume, the meaning of that person.
But then, should we draw the line at sexy doctors, sexy police officers, sexy judges for Halloween? Should we draw the line there?
No, because I think that again, that is different. Because one is like you were saying, secular things, worldly things, okay? The other is sacred things.
True. And as a practicing Catholic, I believe that 100%. You're talking about sacred characters. The problem is that, first of all, there's a number of people out there who don't believe that these were sacred characters, that these were sacred people. They believe they're agnostic or atheist or whatever, and they say, well, she was just a woman, if she even existed at all.
I understand that.
But so therefore, to them, it is there is no more meaning to being a sexy Mary than there is to dressing up as sexy judge.
I'm not saying that there should be any punitive damage, or there should be, repercussions, or we should ban it, okay? I'm not calling for any of that. I'm simply saying what I differentiate as the fundamental difference between the two, okay? Why one is different from the other, to my mind, and why this was offensive and that isn't, is what I'm trying to get at. I'm not saying that everyone in America believes in the Christian tradition. That's obvious. I mean, if you've been to a church recently, you know that. If you haven't, look around at how many of your neighbors are not going to church on Sundays. But so I'm not saying that there should be any sort of catastrophic change over this. We should be banning this person or creating new rules. No, I'm not saying that. All I'm simply saying is that I think that there is a substantive difference between the two, and why I believe that difference is there. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I guess what it comes down to is appropriateness.
Exactly. Tastefulness.
I don't think I'd be talking out of school if I said that I'm beginning to wonder if there's any such thing as tasteful anymore.
That's, I think, is a valid point.
We have crossed so many boundaries. And part of the discussion right before we came on to do this podcast that you and I had, we were talking, and you said that, heaven forbid there is a female pope, and I kind of only half-jokingly said, yet. But then, when you look back at what practicing Catholics did and had to do 20, 30, 40 years ago, just that short amount of time, relatively, compared to Catholicism today.
Unfortunately, I don't have that experience. I don't go back that far, so I can only really take your word for it.
But what I'm saying is, what you see are strict tenets of the faith.
Well, it depends on which parish you belong to.
Well,
yes.
yeah. I mean, and parishes are different.
As we have learned. We do attend, at times, different parishes, and have seen vastly different, diametrically opposed ways of doing things.
And as far as interpretation of the catechism and everything else. And in fact, we do have a podcast on here with Reverend Stanley Kristen, who happens to be our priest from St. Vincent de Paul.
He's a great man. In
Yardville. And him and I talked for an hour about modern Catholicism and practicing. And he's very fundamental. He goes back to the basics of the Ten Commandments and the basics of Christ's teaching.
But he will leave you rolling in the pews. He is a hysterical man.
Or make you walk out, depending.
Either depending on your bent. He will either have you laughing until you cry, or, walking out. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. But he is a wonderful priest. He is a great man.
But he has a very different way of looking at things than even priests in neighboring parishes.
He's the black sheep.
And we're not talking out of school to say not necessarily maybe the most favorite in his diocese. But you have this differentiation, I guess, between what Father Stan would call Catholic light.
I would agree.
Which is, as he puts it, no matter what you do, everybody loves everybody, and everything's going to be all right. God loves you, and you don't have to worry about anything. Everything's going to be good.
God's warm and fluffy.
Or where his point of view is that you need to follow God's basic rules and Ten Commandments, and if you're not doing that, and you're not repentant for sinning and asking forgiveness and confessing and doing the things you practicing Catholics should be doing, then you're in trouble. Your soul is in trouble. He just last week he was talking heavily about heaven and hell.
A lot of fire and brimstone.
Which you don't see
today
tremendous amounts of anymore, even from Pope Francis in the Catholic Church.
Well, it's a whole other discussion.
Well, that was another point that we were making, as far as this thing at the Met, was that, what would the Pope think of this? And one article that we read, pointed out that Pope Francis is kind of turned, I wouldn't say shunned, but kind of distanced himself and has chastised cardinals, priests, bishops in the past for their elaborate and ornate vestments and things. And in his own dress and demeanor, he is much plainer than popes past have been. So the question, the one author's interpretation was that he might just think that, well, actually this is appropriate. Because the reason it was asked is because the Vatican actually did loan several sacred items and costumes and vestments and art objects to the Met for their exhibit, which was part of this. And, you know, as Nicole said, these items are supposed to be, to a certain extent, sacred and mean something.
Well, yeah, I mean, one commentator, I don't remember who exactly said it, but one commentator said in one of the articles we read that, you know, these vestments were on loan from the Vatican, and maybe they really should have put some conditions on the loan.
But that author also said that given Pope Francis's attitudes on things and his policies and stances on things, that it would be more likely that he wouldn't have had an issue with this being used together. He basically would think that those costumes and things belong in a museum anyway, and that, you know, that it should be a much plainer, much more simple presentation.
Well, he might, but there's no way to know until the Vatican actually makes an official statement on
and
this.
And if they do.
And yeah, absolutely, if they do. But what I found absolutely fascinating was Piers Morgan, you know, noted liberal, came out and said, what the hell was the Vatican thinking? I mean, to me, that's pretty hysterical, because, you know, liberals generally are champions of
whatever you want to do.
Whatever you want to do is cool.
If it feels good, do it.
That's right. So, I mean, this, to me, I would think Piers Morgan would be on board with this, but evidently not. I mean, if that article, you know, quoted him accurately, I think that's quite funny, because I never in a million years would have pegged him for saying that. So, it's interesting. Anymore, up is down. In pretty much all aspects of culture, if you've noticed, it's not just politics. It's religion, it's politics, it's anything in culture anymore. Up is down, and you really just can't peg what people are going to say, because they surprise you.
Well, there is we live in very strange times.
We absolutely do.
Just here in America, where it's the right side of the political aisle that's criticizing the Department of Justice and the FBI, and it's the left side of the aisle, the liberals and the left, saying, "How dare you attack the establishment?" The institution of the establishment.
It's a very strange time, but
usually not the way that goes.
No, absolutely not. But yeah, I mean, back to the Met Gala. To me, it's kind of an instance of what Father Stan always says about, and obviously none of you listening have heard a Father Stan sermon. Maybe one of these days we'll be able to broadcast one, because it really is quite an experience.
Well, if you listen to our conversation, he almost pretty much gave one for an hour. So it's
yeah.
Look up Soul Search on our blog, you know, and check out that podcast.
But he's quite funny. But basically, he's always saying that the church should not be attempting to go with the flow of the times. It should be the one holding fast to what it stands for, and being countercultural, and being those salmon that are swimming upstream, not swimming downstream because it is an easier route to go. To me, this gala is the church, you know, swimming downstream because it's easier. You know, and I say the church because Cardinal Timothy Dolan is apparently A-okay with it. So this is an example. The whole thing is an example of the church, you know, swimming downstream because it's easier, rather than swimming upstream like it's supposed to be doing. It's not supposed to be, you know, in agreement and in lockstep with the culture. You know, it's supposed to be countercultural. It's supposed to be radical in that it is not easy. It is not for the faint of heart, you know, and so to me, that this is a perfect example of what he's always preaching, that that the church, that's what the church should not be doing, is going with the flow. And this is an example of that.
Well, we have from the LifeSite News. We do have some quotes from Cardinal Dolan. I think that they're worth reading into the record here at this point. Cardinal, and these are quotes. He's quoted saying, "I did not find the spirit of the evening to be offensive or blasphemous at all. Was some of it edgy? Yes, but I never met any person that seemed to be snippy or snotty about the church, or who intended anything to be offensive." He also said, "We could have had a lecture at the Museum of the Catholic Imagination, and not too many people may have showed up, especially from the crowd last night. But when you do an evening like that, you get everybody. Boy, you talk about the public square, with some of the movers and shakers who were there, and they're reminded of the positive memories of the church and of devotions, prayers, traditions, and liturgies, as many of them told me they were. This could only be for the good of the church. I was really happy to have been there. If this helps people rediscover those roots, then hallelujah, it's a winner." That all according to Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York.
I mean, I think that just goes to put the exclamation point on what I just said. I think that, I don't think something like this, where you're twisting the meaning of the Blessed Virgin Mary, of the popes, of the cardinals, where you're reappropriating them, to use, the buzzwords of the day, where you're reappropriating the meanings for them. I don't think something like that helps people rediscover those roots. I think it just helps them rediscover a new Halloween costume, to go back to what we were saying.
And we may see a lot of the Halloween costumes come from the Met List.
And we may. But, and being reminded of positive memories, that doesn't do anybody any good at the end of the day, Cardinal Dolan. It's not the memories. It's what you're actually doing in the here and now. It's praying the prayers, and the devotions, and attending the liturgies, and carrying on the traditions in the here and now, not 30 years ago. Memories are great, but that's not what you should be emphasizing. Your work as shepherding souls should be emphasizing what you're supposed to be doing in the here and now in order to make it through that narrow gate.
Well, yeah, I don't take issue with that, but I think that where he was going with this is, and we all know that, like you were saying before, you look at your neighbors, you're not seeing a whole lot of cars heading out to church on Sunday morning. It's no secret that the Catholic Church and all churches, all Christian and
any faith,
and of any faith, are losing ground. That they're losing members. That society as a whole has turned away from what used to be a huge part of people's lives. When my mother and father met, they were members of two different churches, and they met on, I believe, a Saturday or a Sunday night in Newark, New Jersey, where they were filming a television show where two choirs were singing. Church and things like that, they were very huge in my parents' life. I know, because they brought me up that way, so it would be something large in my life. Youth groups and barbecues and baseball teams and aside Sunday school and aside from the regular services. That's all changed. That sense of community, I think, has changed dramatically as people have kind of turned inward. Instead of outward to the community and being part of a community, they've turned inward within their homes and are almost becoming like hermits when they're not working, compared to what society used to be.
I'd say that's a very accurate, we've talked about this before, that's a very accurate representation.
But that's my point, is that Cardinal Dolan seems to be trying to bring more backsides in the seats in church, and he sees that as a way to do that. Once they get there, maybe they need to do other things, but I think he's just looking at this as kind of a recruitment advertisement.
Well, maybe he is, but I think that that's a misguided position. I think that you're never going to accomplish the aims that you want to accomplish by beginning in such a disgraceful way. The aims that you're seeking to accomplish, allegedly, hopefully, are bringing more souls into the church, saving more souls. As a cardinal, that should be what you're supposed to be doing all the time, in case anybody was wondering. But so that should be your aim, is saving more souls.
I don't think he got the memo.
Maybe he didn't. I don't know. It might have been lost with those emails. But,
You mean on Hillary's server?
they might be, actually. You never
They're
know.
in New York, so.
They're in New York. I'm sure they've rubbed elbows. Sounds like it. But, so, I mean, theoretically, he should be saving more souls. I don't think, though, that you are going to accomplish such a spiritual goal like that by denigrating and starting off so disgracefully the very thing that you're trying to bring people into. To me, you can't start off with such a low marker and expect to loft people up to where they should be simply by going along with what they're saying. I mean, that to me is an equation that does not make sense. And I think that's just really a sign of the times that, you have, like I was saying just a few minutes ago with, salmon swimming upstream. Cardinal Dolan has apparently decided that it's much easier to swim downstream and hope that you can, latch onto a few of them and convince them to swim upstream than it is to just swim upstream and see where it gets you. But I think that going along with the flow of culture, because I mean, I'm really not too impressed with the state of culture these days. I really don't really call it culture. I don't have another word for it, though, so I have to call it that. But it's not too terribly cultural these days. But, going along with the flow of culture, to me, that's not what you should be doing. You're supposed to be countercultural. The message of Christianity is revolutionary and countercultural at any stage of the culture. It's as revolutionary 2,000 years ago as it is today. And, just as Jesus was pissing off, the elites of his day, so too should the church today be doing that. And I don't see a whole lot of that. And this Met Gala is just another, metastasis of that. To me, it's just absurd that you would think that you can convince enough people to come into the church by going along with their disgraceful cultural tendencies. Not to say that they should be, punished or banned or, not allowed to say and express themselves the way they want to, but at the same time, Cardinal Dolan, the good cardinal, should be expressing himself and the position of the church that he should be taking, which is that this is not appropriate, given that these are sacred images and notions that you're denigrating.
Should Cardinal Dolan have attended?
I don't think he should have, because I think by attending...
Unless the Pope personally dispatched him to keep an eye on stuff, they alone to the Vatican.
Well, I mean, if that were the case, then yes, he should have been there.
Tim, I need you to go down there and make sure nothing falls off a truck, okay?
Well, yeah, I mean, if he were asked to be there just to monitor things and see how things were going, sure, but otherwise, if he's just there to mix and mingle and, have a good time at a party, to me, you're not acting with the dignity of the office. You should not be there just fitting in, swimming along with the other. I don't even know what they are. I would say sheeple, but they don't swim. So,
well, as an example, the entertainment last night, reportedly Madonna did a, quote, spiritualized, unquote, version of Like a Prayer.
Well, I mean, again, that song, when it originally came out, was reappropriating themes, images, ideas, for a very unspiritual experience. Madonna herself has not really stood for much that's spiritual throughout her entire career. So, yeah, when her song "Like a Prayer" first came out, yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone knew she wasn't really talking about prayers and rosary beads and anything spiritual. If you missed that, you missed the whole point of her career. But so for her to be performing that song, I mean, everybody knew that you're not really there to sit there and reimagine as a Catholic. Most Catholics are not imagining things that are like Madonna's "Like a Prayer." I got news for Cardinal Dolan. If he doesn't know that, I mean, we're truly lost as a church in America, at least in that neck of the woods. But, so, everybody knew, obviously, that by performing that song, in the way that it was performed, you're not there to uplift the idea of the Virgin Mary or, anything that's spiritual. It's repurposing the ideas of a faith for something that is entirely the opposite of what the faith stands for. And to me, that is, offensive and inappropriate.
Well, let me ask you this. Had you been aware of this event taking place? I mean, we're not in the socioeconomic strata where we're going to get an invitation to such things.
No, but I mean, I know it goes on every year. I know it's themed. I just didn't know this was the theme.
But if you were given the heads up, this was going to be the theme, and that this may take place in this manner, would you have protested? Would you have gone there and held a sign and protested?
If I were financially able to make it up there, as in if I could have taken the time from work, if I could have, gotten myself to New York, which is rather expensive these days. Well,
let's say all that's a given. It's
okay,
it's just your choice whether you want to or not.
Yes, I would have spoken out about it. Yes.
Then, to get back to the whole original point of the issue, how can we criticize those that protest when they take offense at whatever they feel has been appropriated or is offensive or something like that? How can we say to them, "Oh, come on, you're being silly," when you're willing to go that level at least to protest yourself?
Because, like I said earlier, I think I made it fairly clear. Earlier I said that in my mind, to my sensibilities, there is a vast difference between, culture, secular, and sacred. And the two really cannot be compared. One is not of this world, and the other is of this world.
But you defend Charlie Hebdo's right to...
Yes, but like I said... Do you even listen when I speak?
No, I listen. I'm trying to get a clarification on a point where I see a problem. Yes.
Yes.
You're saying that because this stuff is spiritual.
Would you like an answer? Thank you. Anyway, yes, people can say whatever it is they wish to say. I'm not saying they can't. Okay? They're allowed, I'm allowed to say whatever it is I would like to say, and they're allowed to agree or disagree, etc., and say something about it. I'm not seeing where you're confused. What is the confusion?
No,
the difference between, my between my reaction and people's reactions who, I think are silly, there's a big difference a lot of times. I'm not out there, shooting people, torching cars,
But that's level.
Protesting.
That's level.
Yeah, that's level, exactly. But my point is that a lot of times that is the reaction when you sit there and you tell people, you do things that offend people. I would not stoop to that level.
But you did say if all things being equal, you would have gone to New York, held a sign, and protested.
peaceably protest,
yes,
that is my right as an American to peaceably protest. There's a big difference between
there is
peaceably protesting and inciting violence because you are offended by someone.
Right, but the point is that it's a matter of degrees. Now
everything's a matter of degrees.
But you can't sit back on one hand and say, "Oh, don't be silly. This is meant this way. It's all in good fun." And we should just all be grown-ups and sit there and say, okay. Well, on the other hand, you're willing to go out and protest because you feel this was inappropriate, yet you don't feel something else, which another group might have found just as offensive and bad, and that they're willing to protest. Now, again, I'm not saying go out and shoot things up.
I'm not denying them the right to protest. If they want to stand outside and hold a sign over something that I said or did, be my guest. Stand there all day. I'll even pay for some meals for you, okay?
Well, I wouldn't go that far because you get a crowd of 50 or 100 people coming to protest our podcast. We don't have the money to...
Fine. Well, maybe we'll send a few crumbs.
By the way, make sure that when you hear this, there is a thing there. Make sure you click it, subscribe to our podcast on the blog, and also there is a link there if you want to send us a tip. Please do. We don't make a ton of money doing this, believe me. We don't make anything.
Where was I going before I was interrupted? Oh, yes.
You're buying dinner for the multitude of protesters.
No, that was before you interrupted me. Be my guest. If you want to protest, that's fine. I'm not denying them the right to protest. All I am simply saying is that I see a difference between, a cultural, offense. That if someone's offended, to use your example, by wearing a sombrero as a Halloween costume, if you haven't done anything to said sombrero to change the meaning or, mock it or anything, if you're just wearing a sombrero, that to me there really isn't much to protest about. If you're fundamentally changing the nature of an item or a costume, like you're making it into a sexy nun, that to me is something to take offense over. But again, I'm not denying anyone the right to protest, okay?
Right, but there could be someone out there that sees someone in a sombrero and a poncho who has just the same boiling feelings that you do seeing a sexy nun or a sexy cardinal.
And what is your point?
Do you concede that point?
But what is your point?
That even something that making the distinction of secular and non-secular only goes so far, because to a number of people in the world, Christianity is not their religion. It's a story, like a novel. That these people were not who they say they were. That they didn't do the things they said they did. That it was fiction. So when they see someone mocking a cardinal or a priest or whatever, it runs off their back like a duck, like water off a duck.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same could be said if you're wearing a poncho or whatever, or I'm trying to think. Say you dress yourself up as a leprechaun.
Uh-huh.
Okay. There may be some Irish people who feel just as angry, upset, want to protest, offended at that, or the sombrero and the poncho, or the whatever. And those are secular things. But what you're talking about is you're talking about the level of offense that someone takes at something.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, if you look at it in those terms, anyone can feel angry about such things.
I'm not saying they can't. I'm simply saying, for the umpteenth time, that to my mind there is a difference as to what is offensive and what isn't. Just like in everyone's mind. Everyone draws a line in their mind, unless your mind is so open that everything falls out of it. Everyone draws a line in their mind as to what is something that you should be offended by and what is something you shouldn't be offended by. I merely make the distinction between, culture and spirituality, religion. But everyone has their own way of determining and classifying what it is they're offended by. And I don't, like I said, I'm not denying anyone the right to be offended by something. I'm not saying don't protest. I'm not saying there shouldn't, there should be consequences. They should be penalized. I'm merely saying that I think that denigrating, sacred things, I think that is wrong. And I think that it's hard to make the case for cultural appropriation in America when the entire country, since its inception, has been culturally appropriating from everywhere. So I really don't see how that is something people can get offended about. But again, like I said, everyone has their own way of determining, their own line in their mind as to what is offensive and what isn't. Mine is merely divided between secular and sacred.
Well, we're coming down to the end tonight here, but you know something that is really not offensive?
What's that?
If you look on our blog post, and again, make sure you subscribe to our blog, and so you know when we drop a new video or a podcast. But if you look down there, there is, you know what is available now?
What's that?
This hashtag, the Snark is Real t-shirt. You cannot be a fan of our podcast if you don't have your very own hashtag, the Snark is Real t-shirt.
The snark is definitely real on this podcast.
Yes, it is.
I mean, if you can't tell that, I don't know where you've been for the last however many episodes. So, yes, the snark is alive and well, friends. Don't worry.
So, we have our t-shirt there. Look us up. We have links there for Patreon. As I said, we have a tip line there if you want to tip us a little bit. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you next week when we do our next podcast. I don't know what we'll do that on, though.
We never really know until about 10 minutes of. Generally, we try to riff on themes that are pertinent to the day,
timely,
current events mainly. But pretty much anything we feel like talking about, and as you can tell, we can certainly talk for quite a bit. It's kind of like, if you give a mouse a cookie, if you put two journalists with a microphone, this is what happens. So, so we will definitely figure it out, as we always do, and we will have some interesting commentary from, random corners of our mind. And that about wraps it up, I think.
Well, make sure you follow us also on Twitter at The Grill Radio and on our blog, and contact us. Give us your comments. Let us know what you agree with what we say, or if you don't agree with what we say. Let us know either way. Check out our cool stuff. And
But please, all right, and this is a pet peeve of mine, as a journalist, as a copy editor, if you're going to sit there and give us some nasty, snarky, maybe, comments.
Troll.
At least spell them correctly, because I really can't take when you haven't even looked at what you've written and there's typos everywhere and it's spelled wrong. Come on, people. Learn to spell. So yes, if you're going to give us feedback, please spell.
It'll make Nicole feel better.
It will, because then I won't have to sit there and say, my God, America's educational system is failing massively.
Which may be a whole other topic for another day.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's 4 hours in and of itself, but anyway, so yes, please just spell check everything. I mean, just read it after you write it.
Okay, Nicole, I brought us in. You want to take us out?
Alrighty, so this is Charles W. Kim and Nicole M. L. signing off, America. We will see you next week.